Take that piece of metal off in my courtroom. It is a disruption, and quite frankly, I doubt its authenticity. The judge's voice echoed off the mahogany walls, thick with contempt. My sister-in-law Chloe dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue and smirked at me from the plaintiff table. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply unpinned my Navy Cross, the highest medal a woman can receive for valor in combat, and set it on the defense table. The entire room held its breath. Then the judge went pale, because he did not know the camera. In the back of the room belonged to a federal investigator, and my next move was about to end his entire career. My name is Maya. I am 35 years old. Before I tell you how I dismantled a corrupt judge and a toxic family in one afternoon, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let someone dig their own grave. The madness started 2 weeks earlier on a humid Saturday afternoon at my home in Atlanta. It was supposed to be a simple family cookout, a rare olive branch I extended to my parents and brother to celebrate the start of summer. I was standing by my custom outdoor grill, turning over a rack of ribs, looking out over the sprawling backyard of the 4,000 square foot estate I had purchased in cash just 2 years prior. I had worked tirelessly to build my crisis management firm from the ground up after leaving the military, and this home was my sanctuary. It had a wraparound porch, massive oak trees framing the property, and enough space to finally let me breathe. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Chloe, my brother Jamal's wife. Chloe was a white woman from a family of old Southern money, except the money had supposedly run out 2 generations ago, leaving her with nothing but a lingering sense of entitlement and a wardrobe full of obvious counterfeits. Today she was wearing a glaringly fake Gucci dress that clung to her in all the wrong places, paired with stilettos that were sinking deep into my perfectly manicured grass. She looked entirely out of place at a backyard barbecue. But Chloe always tried too hard to prove she was better than everyone else. She leaned in close, her cheap perfume overpowering the smell of the barbecue smoke. "Jamal and I have some amazing news," she said, her voice high-pitched and practically vibrating with fake excitement. "We are expecting a baby." I smiled genuinely for a moment. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said. "That is wonderful news for you both." She did not smile back. Instead, her eyes darted around my expansive backyard, calculating. "Yes, it is," she continued, her tone shifting into something distinctly transactional. "But you know our apartment downtown is just way too small for a growing family. Jamal and I were talking on the drive over. Since you are single and living in this massive house all by yourself, it is really only fair that you gift us the estate. You know, for the baby." I froze. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the moment she would laugh and say she was kidding. But her pale face remained completely serious. The sheer audacity of her demand hit me so hard that I literally laughed out loud, a deep, unrestrained laugh that carried across the patio. "You have got to be joking," I said, shaking my head as I turned back to the grill. "You want me to just hand over the deed to my $4 million home because you decided to get pregnant?" "I am not joking, Maya." She snapped, her fake sweetness vanishing instantly. "You have more money than you know what to do with. Jamal is your brother. It is your duty to help us build a life." Right on cue. Jamal appeared beside her. My older brother, standing tall in his designer polo shirt, slipped his arm around Chloe's waist and looked at me with that familiar patronizing expression he had perfected since childhood. "Come on, Maya," Jamal said, his voice smooth and commanding. "Do not be selfish. You know how hard it is out here right now. Family takes care of family. It is your duty to step up for us." Family duty. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Hearing Jamal talk about family duty was the ultimate insult, considering the history we shared. Jamal had always been the golden boy of the family. Growing up, our parents, Yvonne and Calvin, treated him like royalty. They drained their entire retirement savings to pay for his tuition at Morehouse College, buying him a new car for his graduation, while I took the bus to my part-time jobs. But it was not just about the money. It was about the deep-seated colorism that my mother allowed to poison our household. Jamal was light-skinned with features our mother deemed refined. I was a dark-skinned girl with thick, tightly coiled 4C hair. From the time I was a little girl, Yvonne made sure I knew my place. I vividly remember sitting between my mother's knees on Sunday mornings, tears streaming down my face as she pulled a hot comb through my natural curls, muttering about how I needed to look presentable so people would not judge us. She constantly praised Jamal's appearance while telling me I needed to work twice as hard just to be considered acceptable. They expected me to play the role of the dutiful invisible daughter who existed only to support her brother's shine. They wanted to saddle me with the black tax, the expectation that I would sacrifice my own future, my own earnings, and my own peace to fund Jamal's lifestyle and cover the financial holes our parents dug for themselves. That is exactly why I enlisted in the United States Navy the moment I turned 18. I ran from their toxic comparisons and their suffocating expectations. I became a hospital corpsman, a combat medic deploying to active war zones where bullets and shrapnel did not care about the shade of my skin or the texture of my hair. I pulled bleeding Marines from burning transports in the blistering heat of the desert. I earned my stripes, my discipline, and my Navy Cross through blood, sweat, and absolute terror. I built my own crisis management firm from the ground up, dealing with high-threat corporate intelligence. I earned every single brick of this estate. And now Jamal stood on my patio, demanding I hand over my sanctuary to his entitled wife. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You want to talk about family duty? Where was your family duty when mom and dad went into debt for your degree? Where was your duty when you let them treat me like a second-class citizen in my own home? I bought this house. I built my life. You and your wife are not getting a single square foot of it." The commotion had drawn the attention of my parents. Yvonne and Calvin marched over from the patio table, their faces tight with disapproval. Yvonne, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat, pointed an accusing finger at me. "Maya, lower your voice this instant," my mother hissed. "You are embarrassing us in front of Chloe. Your brother is asking for your help to raise his child. You have more than enough space here. Do the right thing and sign the house over to them. You owe your brother this much." "I owe him," I repeated, stepping away from the grill and facing all four of them. "I owe the man who let you drain your retirement while I went to a war zone to pay for my own life. I do not owe any of you a damn thing." Calvin crossed his arms, his jaw set in a hard line. "You are being stubborn and disrespectful, Maya. This is a family matter. We are telling you to let Jamal and Chloe move in and take over the property. You can find a nice condo downtown. It is better for the baby to have a yard." The absolute delusion was staggering. They had walked into my home, eaten my food, and casually demanded I surrender my greatest achievement to the golden boy. The years of biting my tongue, of trying to keep the peace, of hoping they would eventually see me as an equal, vanished entirely. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "What did you just say to me?" Yvonne gasped, clutching her chest. "I said get off my property," I commanded, pointing toward the front gate. "All of you, you are not getting my house, you are not getting my money, and you are no longer welcome here. Get your things and leave immediately." Chloe scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "You are really going to kick your pregnant sister-in-law out over a simple request? You are pathetic, Maya." I did not answer her. I simply pulled out my phone and held my thumb over the button to dial my private security team. "Leave," I warned them one final time. Muttering curses and insults, my parents gathered their bags. Jamal grabbed Chloe by the arm and began marching her down the stone walkway toward the front driveway. I followed them at a distance, ensuring they were actually leaving my grounds. The air was thick with humidity and tension. As they stormed down the path, Chloe was complaining loudly about my disrespect, turning her head to glare back at me. She was so focused on throwing me dirty looks that she completely forgot she was wearing cheap, towering stilettos on uneven natural stone. Her heel caught the edge of a paver. Her ankle rolled outward. With a sharp yelp, Chloe stumbled sideways off the walkway and tumbled onto the soft, manicured grass of my front lawn. It was a clumsy, embarrassing fall, but entirely harmless. She landed on her hands and knees in the plush turf. Jamal rushed to her side, shouting as if she had just been hit by a car. "Chloe, baby, are you okay?" Chloe sat up on the grass. She looked down at her knee, which had a tiny, superficial scrape from grazing a landscaping stone on her way down. She looked at Jamal, then she looked up at me standing on the porch. For a split second her face was perfectly calm. Then, like a switch being flipped, her expression contorted into an exaggerated mask of agony. She began wailing, clutching her stomach and sobbing hysterically. "My baby Jamal, she pushed me off the porch." Yvonne and Calvin ran over, hovering around her. Jamal glared up at me, his eyes full of manufactured rage. "Are you crazy, Maya? She is pregnant." I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, watching the terrible theatrical performance. I had been standing 10 feet away from her when she tripped over her own feet. I did not even flinch. As Jamal and Calvin helped Chloe up to her feet, she leaned heavily against her husband. She turned her head slightly so only I could see her face. The hysterical crying stopped for exactly 1 second. A wicked, vindictive smirk spread across her lips. She stared dead into my eyes and whispered loudly enough for only me to hear. "You are going to pay for this." Exactly 2 weeks passed since I kicked them out of my yard. The silence in my house was absolute and incredibly peaceful. I spent my days running my crisis management firm from my home office, coordinating intelligence operations for my corporate clients, and enjoying the solitude of my hard-earned sanctuary. I knew Jamal and my parents were operating in radio silence. There were no passive-aggressive text messages, no voicemails from my mother demanding an apology, and no sudden drop-ins. In my line of work, silence is rarely a sign of peace. Silence usually means the opposition is regrouping and preparing to launch an offensive. I just did not expect their attack to be so unbelievably reckless. It was a Tuesday morning when the perimeter alert on my security system chimed. I pulled up the camera feed on my massive desktop monitor. A man wearing a cheap gray suit was idling in an unmarked sedan at my front gates. He stepped out of the vehicle and hit the intercom button. He claimed he had a certified legal delivery requiring a direct signature. I knew immediately what this was. I buzzed him through the heavy iron gates, walked down to my front door, and waited on the porch with my arms crossed. He walked up the stone steps holding a thick stack of papers bound by a heavy rubber band. He asked if I was Maya Evans. I confirmed my identity. He dropped the massive stack of documents directly into my hands, turned on his heel, and briskly walked back toward his car. "You have been served," he called over his shoulder without looking back. I walked back inside, locking the heavy mahogany door behind me. I tossed the thick manila envelope onto the marble island in my kitchen. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee before I even broke the seal. Panic is a liability. You evaluate the threat and then you neutralize it. I sliced open the envelope, spread the papers out across the counter, and began reading. The legal heading was printed in bold, aggressive letters. Chloe Evans versus Maya Evans. The list of complaints read like a poorly written soap opera script, but the charges were very real and highly damaging. Premises liability, severe emotional distress, endangerment of an unborn child. I read through the statement of facts, and it was a complete fabrication from top to bottom. Chloe claimed that she and Jamal had come over for a peaceful, loving family gathering to share the joyous news of their pregnancy. According to her sworn affidavit, I became violently enraged and bitterly jealous of her happiness. She stated under oath that I chased them out of the house screaming unprovoked threats and deliberately shoved her down the front stone steps. The lies grew bolder with every page. Chloe claimed the brutal fall caused her unbearable physical trauma, put her unborn child at severe medical risk, and left her with debilitating psychological scars. She claimed she was suffering from night terrors, extreme anxiety, and an inability to leave her apartment. The paperwork included a statement from a doctor claiming she needed extensive physical therapy and bed rest to ensure the baby survived my alleged attack. But the real audacity was buried in the prayer for relief at the very end of the document. Chloe was not asking for a check to cover a few scraped knees or imaginary therapy sessions. Her lawyer had drafted a demand for a total transfer of assets. She argued that because of my violent tendencies and the profound suffering I had inflicted upon her growing family, standard financial compensation was insufficient. She was suing for the immediate transfer of the deed to my Atlanta estate. She wanted the house, the very same $4 million house she had demanded I give her for free just 14 days ago. She had weaponized the legal system to orchestrate a hostile takeover of my property. I set the papers down on the cool marble counter. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. I did not shed a single tear. I felt a cold, sharp focus settle over my mind, sharpening my senses. This was the exact same absolute clarity I used to feel in the Navy when the alarm sounded on the base in the middle of the night. My family actually thought I was going to roll over. They thought that because they shared my blood, they could use a frivolous lawsuit to bully me out of my home. They were banking on the assumption that a successful black woman running a corporate firm would be terrified of a public scandal. They assumed I would quietly settle out of court, hand over my keys, and disappear into the shadows to protect my business reputation. They thought I would play the role of the good, quiet scapegoat they had raised me to be. They drastically underestimated who they were dealing with. They forgot that before I wore tailored business suits, I wore combat boots. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person who hated a manipulative scam artist as much as I did. I dialed Letitia. Letitia was not just my corporate attorney. She was my sister in every way that mattered. We met in our early 20s when I had just finished my first deployment and she was grinding through law school. Now she was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Atlanta. Letitia did not play games and she certainly did not lose. She answered on the first ring. I told her I had just been served with a lawsuit demanding my home. Letitia did not gasp. She did not express sympathy. She simply told me to bring the documents to her office in exactly 30 minutes and hung up. That was exactly the kind of energy I needed. 30 minutes later, I walked into Letitia's corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. She was standing behind her massive glass desk, wearing a tailored emerald green suit, her hair pulled back into a flawless bun. Before I even sat down, she snatched the thick manila envelope from my hands. She flipped through the pages, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the heavy paper. I sat in the leather chair opposite her desk and waited. I watched her dark eyes scan the ridiculous allegations Chloe had sworn under oath. A sharp, cynical laugh escaped Letitia's lips. Premises, liability, and emotional distress. She read aloud, her tone dripping with mockery. Your sister-in-law is claiming you shoved her down a flight of stone steps in a jealous rage. Maya, this reads like a bad daytime television script. The audacity is actually impressive. I leaned back in the chair. She wants the entire estate, Letitia. She wants me to hand over the deed to settle the case. Letitia dropped the documents onto her desk and smiled. It was a terrifying smile, the kind of smile she wore right before she destroyed opposing counsel in a boardroom. She walked over to her computer and turned the monitor so I could see the screen. I was not surprised to see she had already started pulling data the moment I called her. You always said Chloe acted like she stepped right out of a Southern wealth catalog, Letitia said, clicking open a file. The accent, the fake designer bags, the constant name-dropping of her grandfather's country club. So I decided to do a little digging into this so-called generational wealth she is so proud of. I leaned forward, looking at the financial reports and property records filling the screen. What did you find? I found a whole lot of nothing, Letitia replied, crossing her arms. Chloe comes from old Southern money, sure. But the key word there is old. The money completely dried up 2 generations ago. Her grandfather squandered the family fortune on bad real estate investments and gambling debts in the late 90s. The ancestral home she always brags about was repossessed by the bank when Chloe was 15. Her family has been living on credit and past glory for decades. They are completely broke. I stared at the screen, letting the information sink in. Chloe had spent the last 3 years treating me like the hired help. She strutted around family dinners, talking down to me, acting like she was doing us a favor by marrying into a black family. She played the part of the wealthy heiress so perfectly that my parents practically worshipped her. Yvonne and Calvin treated her like royalty because they thought she represented the peak of high society. She grew up house poor. Letitia continued, bringing up another document. She probably wore vintage Chanel from her grandmother's closet while eating instant noodles for dinner. She is desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth because that illusion is the only thing she has left. The pieces of the puzzle started snapping together in my mind with rapid-fire precision. If Chloe was broke and desperate for status, Her marriage to my brother made perfect twisted sense. She married Jamal because he projected the exact same illusion, I said, the realization washing over me. Exactly. Letitia nodded. Think about it from her perspective. She meets Jamal. He is handsome, smooth-talking, and driving a leased Mercedes. He is wearing a Rolex and throwing money around at expensive restaurants. Chloe saw a golden ticket. She thought she was marrying into new, highly liquid black wealth. She thought Jamal was going to fund the lifestyle she felt entitled to. I scoffed, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of it all. What she did not know was that Jamal's wealth was completely fabricated. My parents drained their retirement accounts to fund his lifestyle. They took out second mortgages to pay for his luxury car leases and his expensive clothes so he could look successful. He had no real assets. He just had my parents' terrible financial decisions backing him up. Letitia tapped the screen. It is a marriage built entirely on mutual financial deception. Jamal thought he was marrying an aristocratic heiress who would elevate his social status. Chloe thought she was marrying a wealthy businessman who would rescue her from financial ruin. They scammed each other. And now the bill has come due. I looked down at the lawsuit resting on the glass desk. The demand for my $4 million estate glared back at me. This is not about a scraped knee on my front lawn, I said, my voice hardening. This is a survival tactic. It is an extortion play, Letitia corrected sharply. They are drowning Maya. Chloe realizes she hitched her wagon to a man with no real money, and Jamal realizes his wife is not bringing a trust fund to the table. They are expecting a baby, and they have absolutely no way to afford the life they have been pretending to live. So they looked around for a lifeline, and they saw you. They looked at the black daughter. They have spent a lifetime putting down, I added, feeling the anger ignite in my chest. They looked at the combat veteran who built a successful company from scratch. They looked at my home and decided they were entitled to take it. Letitia leaned over the desk, her eyes locking onto mine with absolute seriousness. They assumed that because you run a corporate crisis firm, you would be terrified of a messy public lawsuit. They think you will quietly settle out of court hand over a massive check, or maybe even the house itself, just to make this go away and protect your business reputation. They are using this baby and these fake injuries to hold you hostage. I let out a slow, steady breath. In the military, you learn very quickly that the most dangerous enemy is a desperate one. Chloe and Jamal were cornered by their own lies. They had nothing left to lose, which made them willing to commit perjury, falsify medical distress, and weaponize the legal system just to steal what belonged to me. So what is our move? I asked, my tone shifting into pure business. Letitia smiled again. Her eyes were gleaming with the thrill of the upcoming fight. First, we do not settle. We do not offer them a single dime. We file a response denying every absurd allegation in this complaint. We demand a jury trial. And then, my beautiful friend, we let them dig their own grave. We let Chloe get on the stand under oath and spin her web of lies. I stood up from the leather chair, feeling the weight of the incoming battle settle onto my shoulders. It was a familiar weight, and I welcomed it. They thought I was going to be an easy target. They thought I would cower in the face of a legal threat. They forgot who they were dealing with. Get the response filed today, I told Letitia. Let them think they have the upper hand. Let them think I am scrambling. We are taking this all the way to the courtroom. Letitia picked up the thick stack of papers and dropped them directly into the shredder bin beside her desk. I will handle the legal filings. You just keep your head clear and get your intelligence team ready. We are going to need every single piece of dirt hiding in their closets. I walked out of Letitia's office feeling more focused than I had in years. My family wanted a war. They wanted to steal my peace and my property. I pulled my phone out of my pocket as I stepped into the elevator, mentally mapping out my next steps. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, but I was going to make sure they lost everything in the process. I walked out of Letitia's office, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind me, and I drove straight to my headquarters in Buckhead. My firm, Vanguard Aegis, occupies the top 2 floors of a heavily secured high-rise building. We do not run television ads, and we do not have public billboards. Our clients find us when their backs are pushed entirely against the wall, and they need a crisis neutralized without leaving a single fingerprint behind. My staff consists of former military intelligence officers, elite cybersecurity analysts, and forensic accountants who can locate a hidden penny in a billionaire's offshore portfolio. I bypassed my own corner office and walked directly into the center of the bullpen. I stopped at the desk of my lead forensic accountant, Malik. Malik is a former Defense Intelligence Agency operative. He is brilliant, relentless, and he can trace a wire transfer through 5 international shell companies before his morning coffee even gets cold. I wrote 2 names on a yellow sticky note and tapped it against his keyboard. Jamal Evans and Chloe Evans. I need a level 4 financial diagnostic, I told him, keeping my voice low and even. I want bank accounts, credit cards, property deeds, tax returns, auto loans, and outstanding lines of credit. I want to know what they had for breakfast 3 weeks ago and if they put it on a high-interest visa. Malik glanced at the names. He raised an eyebrow, clearly recognizing my brother's name, but he did not ask any unnecessary questions. He simply nodded and turned back to his array of glowing monitors. You will have the complete package within 48 hours. For the next 2 days, I aggressively compartmentalized the looming lawsuit and focused entirely on my corporate clients. But in the quiet, isolated moments of the evening, my mind kept drifting back to Jamal. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated entitlement required to sue your own flesh and blood for their home. Growing up, Jamal never had to work for a single thing he possessed. When he totaled his first car at 19 because he was speeding to a fraternity party, my parents, Yvonne and Calvin, did not make him get a minimum wage job to pay for the extensive damages. Instead, they took out a high-interest loan and bought him a newer, faster car. When he racked up $10,000 in credit card debt during his junior year at Morehouse College, my parents quietly drained their emergency savings fund to pay it off before it could damage his pristine credit score. They shielded him from every single consequence of his reckless actions. They curated a toxic environment where Jamal truly believed the world owed him an endless safety net. And when their money finally ran dry, when they had sacrificed their own retirement to maintain his illusion of success, he naturally assumed my bank accounts would seamlessly take over the funding of his life. I thought the black tax was a mandatory subscription I was forced to pay just for the privilege of being his sister. Exactly 48 hours later, Malik knocked on my office door. The glass walls of my office offer a sweeping panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, the very city I conquered through relentless discipline and sleepless nights. Malik walked in and placed a secure encrypted tablet directly on the center of my desk. He did not look triumphant. He looked deeply grim. "It is a financial bloodbath," Malik said, crossing his thick arms over his chest. I have seen bankrupt technology startups with cleaner ledgers than these 2 individuals. They are not just broke. They are actively sinking to the bottom of the ocean. I activated the screen and opened the encrypted dossier. The numbers hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The red ink was absolutely blinding. Chloe had 5 different credit cards registered in her name. Every single one of them was maxed out to the absolute limit. She had accumulated $65,000 in high-interest debt on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and expensive dinners at exclusive restaurants, all designed to maintain her carefully curated social media image as a wealthy Southern belle. Jamal was not doing any better. He had taken out $40,000 in high-yield personal loans from predatory lenders. Their joint checking and savings accounts were completely drained, running entirely on overdraft extensions. The total unsecured debt sat at a staggering $150,000. I swiped to the next page of the report, pulling up their asset column. It was completely barren. The luxury Mercedes Jamal loved to park proudly in my driveway to show off to my neighbors. It was a lease, and they were 3 full months behind on the payments. The repossession order had already been generated by the dealership. Then I saw the absolute crown jewel of their financial failure. The downtown luxury apartment Chloe constantly complained was far too small for their growing family. It was not too small. It was slipping right through their fingers. A pre-foreclosure notice had been filed by their bank exactly 30 days ago. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and let the cold, hard facts wash over my mind. The timeline aligned with devastating, undeniable clarity. 30 days ago, they received the formal notice that they were going to lose their home and be thrown out onto the street. 14 days ago, they showed up uninvited to my summer cookout, aggressively demanding that I sign over the deed to my $4 million estate. When I laughed in their faces and kicked them off my property, they realized their primary survival plan had completely failed. Chloe did not trip over her stilettos by accident. Jamal did not scream in manufactured rage because he was genuinely concerned for the safety of his wife. It was a calculated, improvised pivot. When begging for a massive handout failed, they immediately switched their tactics to outright extortion. This lawsuit had absolutely nothing to do with a scraped knee, severe emotional distress, or the safety of an unborn child. It was a desperate, highly coordinated cash grab. They were backed into a massive financial corner, suffocating under the crushing weight of their own lies and reckless spending habits. They needed a massive influx of cash, or an entirely new property, to save them from total public humiliation and homelessness. They looked at my flawless combat record, my highly successful corporate firm, and my pristine professional reputation, and they calculated that I would be an easy mark. They figured a high-profile black woman in the corporate sector would quickly write a six-figure settlement check just to keep a messy, embarrassing family lawsuit out of the local news cycle. They were banking entirely on my fear. But they forgot that fear is a luxury you lose very early in combat training. I looked up at Malik. My pulse was steady, my breathing perfectly calm. I pointed a steady finger at the tablet resting on my desk. "This is excellent work, Malik. Now I need you to dig even deeper. I want you to run a full background trace on Chloe's extended family tree. I want to know exactly who is funding this lawsuit. With $150,000 in debt, they cannot possibly afford the retaining fee for the shark attorney who drafted this ridiculous complaint. Someone else is backing this play. Find out who it is." Malik nodded, a sharp, knowing smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Consider it done." I locked the tablet securely in my desk drawer. The game had completely changed. This was no longer just a frivolous family dispute over a clumsy fall on my porch. This was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a personal injury claim. Jamal and Chloe had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy their entire fake narrative. They wanted to play the helpless victims in a court of law. I was going to let them step right up to the witness stand, swear on a Bible, and then I was going to bury them in the rubble of their own financial ruin. I was still sitting at my desk, organizing the financial dossiers Malik had prepared when my personal cell phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. Yvonne never called me during business hours unless she needed something, or unless Jamal had complained to her and she was calling to issue a reprimand. I let it ring 3 times. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the familiar wave of childhood conditioning that always tried to drag me back into submission. I pressed accept and put her on speakerphone. "Maya, please." Yvonne did not even say hello. She bypassed any normal greeting and launched straight into a theatrical, trembling sob. "You have to stop this. You are tearing our family apart. You have to settle this lawsuit before it gets completely out of hand." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flashing red numbers on Malik's financial report. "Stop what exactly?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Stop defending myself against a fraudulent lawsuit," she sniffled loudly, a sound I had heard 1,000 times growing up, whenever she needed to manipulate my father into buying something they could not afford. "Maya, Chloe is pregnant. The stress of a legal battle is terribly dangerous for the baby. She is having nightmares. She cannot eat. If something happens to your future niece or nephew, it will be entirely your fault. Just give them the house. You have your business. You can buy another one. They need a safe place to raise their child. Just give them the house." She said it so casually, as if she were asking me to lend them a spare television or a set of dishes. I closed my eyes. For a fraction of a second, the 35-year-old corporate CEO vanished, and I was 16 years old again. I was standing in our cramped kitchen, watching Jamal break my carefully built science fair project because he was throwing a basketball indoors. When I cried, Yvonne forced me to apologize to him for leaving my project on the counter. She always demanded that I shrink myself to accommodate his destructive behavior. She protected his ego at the absolute expense of my sanity. They do not need a safe place, Mom, I said, bringing myself firmly back to the present. They need a bailout. I know about the $150,000 in credit card debt. I know about the car repossession. I know their downtown apartment is in pre-foreclosure. The line went completely dead silent. The fake crying stopped instantly. You checked their finances? Yvonne asked, her voice dropping the fragile act and snapping into sharp, defensive anger. How dare you violate your brother's privacy like that? How dare I? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your daughter-in-law is suing me for my $4 million estate, claiming I violently assaulted her, and you are mad that I ran a background check. They just need a fresh start. Maya. Yvonne snapped her true colors, finally bleeding through the audio connection. Jamal made some bad investments trying to keep his wife happy. Chloe is used to a certain lifestyle. They are struggling. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. You are single. You do not have a family to provide for. It is your duty as a successful Black woman to lift up your brother. Do not make us go through a public trial. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation at the church? If Pastor Davis and the congregation find out we are suing each other, the embarrassment will ruin us. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. The last lingering shred of hope I had for my parents completely evaporated. You knew I stated the reality of her complicity washing over me. You know Chloe is faking the injury. You know she tripped over her own shoes. You were standing right there when it happened. You know this entire lawsuit is a manufactured scam to steal my home so Jamal can pay off his massive debts. Yvonne did not deny it. She did not express outrage or claim misunderstanding. She simply tried to justify the extortion. We are doing what we have to do to protect Jamal, Yvonne said coldly. You have always been so selfish, Maya. You went off to the military and built your little business and you left us behind. We paid for his college. We paid for his wedding. We have nothing left. We are completely tapped out. You have the resources to fix this right now. If you just sign over the deed, Chloe will drop the charges. The baby gets a home, Jamal gets his debt cleared, and we can all move on. If you drag this into a courtroom, you will lose your family forever. She was not just an enabler, she was a co-conspirator. My own mother was actively participating in a plot to destroy my reputation, steal my assets, and extort me all to cover up her golden child's financial incompetence. She was willing to brand me a violent, unstable veteran in public records just to protect her image at a Sunday church service. You are right about one thing, I told her, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. I do have the resources to fix this, but I am not writing a check and I am certainly not signing over my home. Maya, do not do this, Yvonne warned, her tone turning venomous. You cannot win against Chloe's family. Her uncle has powerful connections in the legal system. They will crush you in court. I felt a sharp spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. Chloe's uncle, the hidden financial backer Malik was searching for. Yvonne had just handed me a massive piece of the puzzle without even realizing it. Tell Jamal he better buy a very nice suit for his court appearance, I said, ignoring her threat. And tell Chloe she better practice her crying, because I am not settling, I am not negotiating. I am taking this all the way to a jury, and I am going to make sure every single person in your church congregation sees exactly who you people really are. I hung up the phone before she could scream another word. I dropped my phone onto the desk, taking a slow, deep breath to steady the furious pounding of my heart. The betrayal was absolute, but the clarity it provided was invaluable. I no longer had to hold back out of some misplaced sense of familial loyalty. They had declared war, and they had made it perfectly clear that they would use any dirty, corrupt tactic available to them. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for Letitia. She answered immediately, the background noise of her busy law firm filtering through the line. Did you get my message about the court filing? Letitia asked. I did, I replied. But there is a change of plans regarding our legal strategy. My mother just called to try and extort me into a settlement. She let it slip that Chloe's uncle is leveraging powerful legal connections to back this lawsuit. They are extremely confident that the system is rigged in their favor. Letitia went dead silent on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was pure ice. If they are bringing outside influence into a courtroom, this is no longer just a civil dispute. This is corruption. Exactly, I said. I want you to reject any and all settlement offers they send our way. We are not negotiating. We are taking this to trial. I want them under oath. I want them on the stand." Letitia let out a dark, satisfied chuckle. "I will draft the rejection letter right now. We are going to burn their entire operation to the ground." "Burn it to the ground," I agreed. I hung up the receiver and looked out the massive glass windows of my office. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a city of fierce competition and relentless ambition. My family thought my dark skin, my military background, and my independence made me a perfect scapegoat. They thought I would bow to the pressure of preserving a fake toxic family image. They were about to learn a devastating lesson about what happens when you corner a combat veteran who holds all the receipts. 2 months of legal maneuvering brought us to the polished marble floors of the Fulton County Courthouse. I walked through the heavy double doors, wearing a tailored charcoal pinstripe suit, my posture straight, and my expression entirely unreadable. Letitia walked in lockstep beside me, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that essentially functioned as a walking arsenal of case law and legal precedent. We did not speak. We did not need to. We had spent weeks preparing for every possible legal scenario, but the hostility we were about to walk into was something even Letitia had not fully anticipated. When we pushed open the swinging wooden doors to the assigned courtroom, Jamal and Chloe were already seated at the plaintiff table. I had to suppress a dark, cynical laugh at the sheer level of costume design Chloe had put into her appearance. She had completely abandoned her usual flashy counterfeit designer aesthetic. Gone were the loud logos and the cheap stilettos. Today she was wearing a modest, pale pink maternity dress that looked like it belonged on the cover of a conservative parenting magazine. Her hair, usually sprayed and styled to the heavens, was pulled back into a soft, intentionally messy braid. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hands, keeping one arm wrapped protectively over her slightly rounded stomach. Jamal sat directly next to her, dressed in a somber navy suit, playing his assigned role perfectly. He kept his hand resting over hers, projecting the image of a terrified, fiercely protective husband guarding his traumatized wife. I noticed my parents, Yvonne and Calvin, sitting in the front row of the gallery, right behind the plaintiff table. Yvonne shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom as I walked down the aisle. She leaned forward and whispered something to Chloe, patting her shoulder reassuringly. They were fully committed to this theatrical performance, completely united in their delusion that they were about to walk out of this building with the deed to my $4 million estate. The heavy door behind the bench swung open and the bailiff instructed the room to rise. Judge Harrison Sterling took his seat. He was an older white man with stark silver hair, heavy drooping jowls, and a permanent deep-set scowl that seemed to deepen the absolute second. His eyes locked onto my side of the courtroom. I knew instantly that the temperature in the room was entirely wrong. In my line of work, you learn to read a room the moment you enter it. You evaluate the micro-expressions, the body language, and the unspoken power dynamics. Judge Sterling did not look at me like an impartial mediator of the law. He looked at me like I was a piece of trash that had blown onto his freshly manicured lawn. Before Letitia could even open her mouth to formally state our presence for the record, Judge Sterling leaned over the heavy wooden bench, adjusting his reading glasses. "Let us get one thing straight before we begin these preliminary proceedings." Judge Sterling snapped, his voice a gravelly, condescending bark. "I have read the initial filings. I am well aware of the defendant's background. I run a highly civilized, orderly courtroom. I will not tolerate any aggressive, intimidating, or disruptive behavior, and I will not hesitate to have the bailiff remove anyone who fails to respect the decorum of this bench." Is that perfectly clear to the defense? He was looking directly at me. He was not addressing Letitia. He was speaking to me like I was a dangerous, volatile criminal before the first piece of evidence had even been submitted. Letitia stood up instantly, her spine rigid, her voice ringing with professional ice. "Your Honor, the defense is fully aware of courtroom decorum. My client is a decorated military veteran and the CEO of a highly respected corporate firm. There is absolutely no reason to presume she would behave otherwise." Judge Sterling waved his hand dismissively, cutting Letitia off mid-sentence. "I did not ask for your resume, counselor. I asked if my instructions were clear." "We understand, Your Honor," Letitia replied, keeping her tone dangerously even. Chloe's lawyer stood up. He was a slick, overpriced attorney named Preston, wearing a suit that cost more than Jamal's entire credit card limit. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, the plaintiff would like to file a preliminary motion for a protective order. Given the defendant's intensive combat training and the violent nature of the unprovoked assault on my fragile client, we are requesting that the defendant be restricted from approaching the plaintiff table at any time during these proceedings. My client is suffering from severe post-traumatic stress, and the mere physical proximity of her attacker is causing undue distress to her and her unborn child. It was an absolutely absurd, baseless motion. It was designed entirely to paint a narrative. They were intentionally trying to frame me as a lethal, unhinged weapon, leveraging every racist and sexist trope available to cast me as the angry, aggressive black woman, terrorizing a delicate, weeping victim. Letitia was on her feet before Preston even finished his sentence. Objection, Your Honor. This motion is entirely prejudicial and completely without merit. There are no criminal charges pending against my client. There is no police report indicating any violence occurred. This is a civil dispute, and opposing counsel is attempting to smear my client's character with baseless fear-mongering. Objection overruled. Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a whip. I will decide what has merit in my courtroom. Given the medical affidavits claiming severe emotional distress from the plaintiff, I am sustaining the motion. The defense will remain strictly at their table. I will not have an expecting mother subjected to a hostile environment. I sat frozen in my chair. He had just sustained a motion labeling me a physical threat without a single shred of actual evidence. I watched Chloe bury her face in Jamal's shoulder. Jamal wrapped his arm around her, kissing the top of her head. He did not even have the courage to look me in the eye. He was sitting there actively participating in a legal character assassination of his own sister, all to erase his own massive debts. I let out a slow, controlled exhale through my nose. It was a simple, quiet breath, a grounding technique I had used 1,000 times in high-pressure combat zones to regulate my heart rate and maintain absolute focus. Judge Sterling's head snapped toward me with the speed of a striking snake. Do you have something to say to this court? Sterling barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red as he pointed his heavy wooden gavel directly at my face. I looked up at him, my expression perfectly blank. No, Your Honor. Then you will control your attitude. Sterling threatened, leaning so far over the bench, I could see the veins bulging in his neck. If you sigh, scoff, or breathe too loudly in my direction again, I will hold you in contempt of court. I will throw you in a holding cell so fast it will make your head spin. You will sit there silently, and you will show respect for this institution, or you will spend the weekend behind bars. Do I make myself clear? Letitia tensed beside me, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her pen. She was a fraction of a second away from unleashing a fiery legal objection that would likely get us both thrown out. I reached under the table and tapped her knee twice, a silent command to hold the line. In the military, you learn very quickly that when you are walking through a minefield, you do not stomp your feet. You observe the explosive patterns. Judge Sterling was not just biased, he was aggressive. He was actively trying to provoke me into an outburst. He desperately wanted me to snap, to raise my voice, to give him the exact justification he needed to legally validate Chloe's fake narrative. He wanted me to be the monster they claimed I was. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I locked eyes with Judge Sterling. I did not glare. I did not blink. I simply gave him a crisp, precise military nod. Crystal clear, Your Honor. Sterling sneered clearly, disappointed that I had not taken the bait, and signaled for Preston to call his first witness. I sat perfectly still, my mind racing with cold, calculating precision. Judges can be difficult. They can be prejudiced. But the level of absolute unhinged hostility Sterling was displaying went far beyond simple bias. He was running a completely rigged game. I watched Chloe dab her fake tears, and I watched Sterling look at her with protective sympathy. The fix was in. But they had no idea that I had an entire intelligence firm waiting on standby, and I was about to find out exactly who was pulling this judge's strings. Preston called his first witness to the stand. It was not Chloe, it was my own brother. Jamal walked up to the witness box wearing his tailored navy suit, looking every bit the polished, respectable businessman he desperately pretended to be. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and then immediately began to lie through his teeth. Preston paced in front of the jury box, using a soft, sympathetic tone. He asked Jamal to describe the events of the family cookout. Jamal leaned into the microphone. He painted a picture of a loving brother simply trying to share the joyous news of a pregnancy with his sister. Then he shifted his posture, looking down at his hands, as if recounting a horrific trauma. He claimed that I completely snapped. He testified under oath that my time in the military had left me deeply unstable, prone to violent outbursts and completely incapable of handling normal social interactions. He looked directly at the judge and said I was a ticking time bomb. He swore that he watched me violently shove his pregnant wife down a flight of stone steps, simply because I was jealous of her happiness. I sat at the defense table, my face a mask of absolute calm. Hearing your own flesh and blood commit perjury to steal your home is a surreal experience. Jamal knew exactly what I went through in the Navy. He knew the sacrifices I made. Yet here he was weaponizing my honorable service, twisting my combat deployments into a narrative of mental instability, all to pay off his massive credit card debt. Yvonne and Calvin nodded along from the front row of the gallery, validating every single lie pouring out of their son's mouth. Judge Harrison Sterling leaned forward on the bench, giving Jamal his full, undivided attention. Sterling looked at my brother with profound sympathy, taking meticulous notes, and occasionally shooting me glares filled with utter disgust. The entire room was completely enchanted by Jamal's performance. They thought they were winning, but they did not know that my smartwatch had just vibrated against my wrist. It was a custom haptic pattern, 3 short taps. It meant my lead forensic accountant, Malik, had just breached a secure firewall and deposited a Class A intelligence dossier directly into our encrypted server. I did not move my head, I simply shifted my eyes toward Letitia. She felt the silent command. Letitia casually reached out and tapped the screen of her encrypted laptop resting on the defense table. She opened the secure inbox. My firm Vanguard Aegis does not just run basic background checks. We do not just look at public records or simple credit scores. When I unleash my intelligence team on a target, we dissect their entire digital and financial existence. We pull offshore routing numbers, deleted communications, and buried liabilities. If a person has a secret that can destroy them, Malik will find it, package it, and deliver it to me with a neat little bow. Letitia's eyes scanned the document Malik had just sent. I watched her perfectly manicured fingernail trace the screen as she read the summary. For a fraction of a second, her jaw tightened. The professional mask slipped, revealing a flash of absolute predatory shock. She quickly composed herself, subtly angling the laptop screen so I could read the bold red text illuminating the digital dossier. Malik had not just investigated Chloe and Jamal. Following my instructions to find the hidden financial backer, he had run a full diagnostic on Judge Harrison Sterling. The truth staring back at me from the glowing screen was staggering. Judge Sterling was completely compromised. According to the intelligence report, Sterling possessed a severe, crippling addiction to high-stakes commercial real estate investments. 5 years ago, he had quietly leveraged everything he owned to back a massive luxury development project on the outskirts of Atlanta. He used a labyrinth of anonymous shell companies to hide his involvement, but Malik's algorithms had easily ripped right through the corporate veils. The real estate project had been a catastrophic failure. It went belly up, leaving Sterling personally liable for a massive debt. Judge Harrison Sterling owed $2.5 million. He was financially ruined, one missed payment away from total public exposure, disbarment, and total bankruptcy. But the real twist was who currently owned that massive debt. Malik had traced the paper trail of the loan. 6 months ago, the debt was quietly purchased for pennies on the dollar by a boutique private equity firm called Heritage Holdings. Letitia scrolled down to the executive summary revealing the board of directors for Heritage Holdings. The CEO and primary shareholder was a man named Clayton Montgomery. Clayton Montgomery was Chloe's uncle. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with devastating clarity. This was the powerful legal connection my mother had bragged about on the phone. This was the reason Chloe and Jamal were so ridiculously confident they could win a fabricated personal injury lawsuit. The trial was a complete sham. Judge Sterling was not just biased against me because of some personal prejudice. He was bought and paid for. He was an active participant in an extortion ring. Uncle Clayton held Sterling's $2.5 million debt over his head like a guillotine. Sterling was specifically maneuvered onto this civil case through judicial reassignment, ensuring he would be the one holding the gavel. The unspoken deal was obvious. If Judge Sterling delivered a ruling that forced me to hand over my $4 million estate to Chloe and Jamal, saving them from their own financial ruin, Uncle Clayton would quietly forgive Sterling's massive real estate debt. It was a mutually beneficial criminal conspiracy playing out right in front of my face. Letitia turned her head, making brief, intense eye contact with me. I could see the legal gears grinding in her mind. We had the smoking gun. We had the exact evidence required to stop the trial, demand an immediate mistrial, and report Sterling to the Judicial Review Board. We could blow the whistle right now and watch the entire courtroom grind to a halt. I gave Letitia a microscopic shake of my head. No. If we brought the evidence forward now, Judge Sterling would simply feign ignorance, recuse himself from the case, and claim it was a massive misunderstanding. He would slither away with a slap on the wrist, and my family would just find another corrupt avenue to attack my assets. A mistrial would only delay the inevitable. In crisis management, you do not interrupt your enemy when they are in the middle of committing a felony. You let them cross the point of no return. I wanted Jamal to finish committing perjury on the public record. I wanted Chloe to take the stand next and swear under oath that I brutally assaulted her. I wanted Judge Sterling to confidently orchestrate his illegal ruling. I needed them all to dig their graves so deep that they would never be able to crawl back out. I looked back up at the witness stand. Jamal was currently wiping a fake tear from his eye, telling the jury how much it broke his heart to see his sister become such a violent, unpredictable monster. He looked over at Chloe, sending her a look of pure fabricated devotion. I sat perfectly still, my breathing slow and steady. My own family had conspired with a corrupt federal official to steal my sanctuary. They had weaponized the very justice system designed to protect people. They thought they had trapped a helpless scapegoat in a rigged game. They were absolutely right about one thing: the game was rigged, but I was the one holding the detonator. Preston called his next witness. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom seemed to hold their breath as Chloe stood up from the plaintiff table. She did not just walk to the witness stand. She floated. She moved with the slow, calculated hesitation of a wounded animal, keeping one hand resting protectively over her small baby bump, while the other gripped the wooden railing as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She had perfected the art of weaponized fragility, wrapping her whiteness and her pregnancy around herself like a bulletproof vest. She raised a trembling right hand to take the oath. When she sat down in the leather chair, she looked impossibly small. The oversized pink maternity dress swallowed her frame, intentionally chosen to make her look completely defenseless. Preston approached the podium, his voice dropping an entire octave into a gentle, soothing register. He spoke to her as if she were made of spun glass. He asked her to state her name for the record, and Chloe replied with a voice so thin and fragile that the court reporter actually had to ask her to speak into the microphone. Then Preston asked her to recount the events of that Saturday afternoon at my estate. Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. Her shoulders shook. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, before looking up at the jury box with wide, terrified eyes. She spun a masterpiece of absolute fiction. She told the court that she and Jamal had simply wanted to share the joyous blessing of their growing family. She claimed she brought a pie. She claimed she came with nothing but love in her heart. And then she turned her gaze toward me. She pointed a trembling finger in my direction. She said. I snapped. She told the jury that my eyes went completely dark, that I started screaming about how Jamal never deserved happiness. She claimed that my military background had turned me into a volatile, aggressive threat, and that I was insanely jealous of her perfect marriage. According to Chloe, I did not just ask them to leave. She testified under oath that I chased them out the front door, grabbed her by the shoulders, and violently hurled her down the stone steps. I thought I was going to lose my baby, Chloe wailed, her voice cracking as she buried her face in her hands. I hit the ground so hard, I felt the breath leave my lungs. I was screaming for Jamal and she just stood there on the porch laughing at me. She wanted to hurt my child. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. Her shoulders heaved with violent, hysterical sobs. The courtroom was dead silent, captivated by her display of sheer terror. But sitting just 20 feet away at the defense table, my training allowed me to see exactly what the jury could not. I watched her chest rise and fall. I watched her wipe furiously at her eyes. But there was not a single actual tear. Her cheeks were completely dry. The tissue she kept dabbing against her face was spotless. She was hyperventilating on command, using the volume of her sobs to mask the absolute lack of genuine physical emotion. It was a centuries-old tactic playing out in real time. The terrified, helpless white woman shrinking away from the dangerous, aggressive black woman. She knew exactly what narrative she was tapping into, and she was playing it like a grand piano. Judge Harrison Sterling leaned forward over the bench, his face entirely softened by sympathy. Evans Sterling said, his voice dripping with paternal concern. "Do you need a moment? I can call a brief recess, if recounting this trauma is too overwhelming for you. We can have the bailiff bring you a glass of water." Chloe peeked out from behind her dry tissue, giving the judge a brave, trembling nod. "No, Your Honor," she whispered into the microphone. "I want to tell the truth. I want to be brave for my baby. I cannot let her keep terrorizing us." Sterling nodded approvingly, casting a murderous, venomous glare in my direction. He was eating out of the palm of her hand. Preston resumed his questioning, guiding her through the aftermath of the fabricated assault. He asked her to describe her current physical and emotional state. Chloe gripped the edges of the witness box, painting a picture of total devastation. She claimed the physical pain was agonizing, requiring heavy medication that terrified her to take because of the pregnancy. But she insisted the emotional scars were far worse. She told the court she was suffering from debilitating night terrors. She swore under oath that she woke up screaming every single night, terrified that I was breaking into her apartment to finish what I started. She claimed she could no longer leave her home without suffering massive panic attacks, and that the sheer anxiety of my existence was putting her into early stages of medical distress. "I am a prisoner in my own mind," Chloe sobbed, clutching her chest. "I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. I jump at every shadow. She is a trained combat veteran. She knows how to hurt people. I know she will not stop until she destroys my family." I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap. My spine was perfectly straight. My breathing remained rhythmic and slow. Letitia sat beside me, her pen flying across her legal pad, documenting every single lie pouring out of Chloe's mouth. Every fabricated detail, every exaggerated claim of trauma, every tearless sob was another count of perjury stacking up against her. We knew what was waiting in the encrypted folder on Letitia's laptop. We knew about the 4K security footage currently locked into evidence. We knew Chloe was lying through her teeth, and we were perfectly content to let her lock herself inside a cage of her own making. Preston rested his direct examination on a highly emotional note, thanking Chloe for her incredible bravery in the face of such a terrifying predator. Judge Sterling thanked her as well, offering her a warm, reassuring smile before turning his attention back to the defense table. The hostility returned to Sterling's face the second he looked at me. The trap was fully set. They had painted their picture, they had established their victim. Now it was time to establish the monster, and they were going to do everything in their power to force me into that role. Preston stepped away from the witness box, leaving Chloe to softly weep into her hands. He turned his attention to the bench, but his body was angled so the entire gallery could hear him. He buttoned his expensive suit jacket, his face set in an expression of deep manufactured sorrow. "Your Honor," Preston began, his voice echoing off the polished mahogany walls, "what we have heard today is not just a tragic family dispute. It is a terrifying cautionary tale about what happens when highly trained, combat-hardened individuals fail to reintegrate into civilized society." He was doing it. He was laying the exact foundation Letitia had warned me about. He was moving past the fabricated events on my porch and launching a full-scale assassination of my character. Preston began pacing slowly in front of the defense table, careful to keep a deliberate theatrical distance from me, as if stepping too close might trigger an explosion. "We must look at the defendant's history to understand the sheer magnitude of the threat she poses to my client. Maya Evans spent years in active hostile war zones. She was deployed to regions where extreme violence was not just normalized, it was required for survival. She operated in environments that fundamentally alter the human brain, stripping away the natural restraints of empathy and emotional regulation. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I watched him twist my honorable service, my dedication to saving lives in the desert, into a grotesque liability. He did not stop at my military record. He leaned heavily into dog whistle politics, deploying a calculated barrage of racist and sexist microaggressions designed to paint me as the ultimate stereotype. Your Honor, Preston continued, lowering his voice to a grave whisper. Look at the defendant's demeanor even now. Notice the absolute lack of remorse, the cold, uncompromising hostility she radiates. She does not communicate, Your Honor. She commands. She does not request. She demands. My client, a delicate, expecting mother, simply approached her with love and joyous news. But the defendant, fueled by a deeply ingrained militant aggression, perceived that joy as a threat. He gestured toward me with a look of profound pity. She runs a high-threat crisis management firm. She has built an entire civilian career on ruthlessness. She is paid to crush opposition, to intimidate, and to dominate. And she applied that exact same ruthless, uncompromising aggression to her own fragile sister-in-law. She physically overpowered a smaller, defenseless woman, showing zero regard for the unborn child my client was carrying. The strategy was brutally transparent. He was weaponizing the angry black woman trope and fusing it with the broken veteran stereotype. He wanted the court to look at my dark skin, my natural hair, my tailored suit, and my military background, and see nothing but an untamed, dangerous animal that needed to be put down. He wanted to strip me of my humanity so that stealing my $4 million estate would look like an act of public safety rather than a criminal extortion plot. Judge Harrison Sterling absorbed every single word like it was gospel truth. Sterling slowly took off his reading glasses and looked down at me from the high bench. His face was twisted into a scowl of absolute disgust. The veins in his neck were visibly pulsing. He was not just listening to Preston. He was actively participating in the character assassination. I have seen this tragic pattern before. Counselor Judge Sterling said, his gravelly voice dripping with condescension. We welcome these individuals back into polite society, but we often fail to recognize that they bring the war home with them. They forget that they are no longer in a combat zone. They forget that they cannot resolve their interpersonal grievances with brute force and militant hostility. Sterling leaned forward, pointing a heavy finger in my direction. This court takes allegations of unprovoked physical violence extremely seriously. The fact that a trained combat veteran would use her tactical advantage to brutalize a pregnant woman is not just a civil liability. It is a moral failing of the highest order. I am deeply, profoundly concerned about the defendant's presence in normal society. The sheer audacity of his statement sent a shockwave of cold fury through my chest. The judge had completely abandoned any pretense of impartiality. He was openly declaring me a violent menace on the public record, validating every single lie Chloe had sobbed into the microphone. He was establishing the legal justification he would use to sign my house over to my brother. I allowed my eyes to flick toward the gallery. My mother Yvonne and my father Calvin were sitting in the front row, nodding in solemn agreement with the judge. My own parents were sitting in a federal courtroom, actively co-signing a racist, degrading narrative about their daughter, just to secure a financial bailout for their golden boy. Yvonne dabbed at her eyes, leaning over to whisper words of comfort to Jamal, who was staring at the floor playing the role of the exhausted, traumatized husband. It took every ounce of military discipline I possessed to keep my face entirely neutral. The biological urge to stand up, slam my hands on the table and scream the truth was almost overwhelming. They wanted me to yell. They were practically begging me to lose my temper. If I raised my voice by a single decibel, if I slammed my hand on the desk, if I showed even a fraction of the righteous anger burning in my veins, Sterling would instantly slam his gavel, hold me in contempt, and have the bailiff drag me out in handcuffs. They would have the ultimate proof that I was exactly the unhinged monster they claimed I was. I took a slow, deep breath, expanding my diaphragm, keeping my heart rate in perfect check. I looked at Letitia. She was sitting completely motionless beside me, but her eyes were dark and predatory. Her pen was gripped so tightly in her fingers that her knuckles were bone white. She knew exactly what they were doing, and she knew exactly how we were going to tear it all down. Preston walked back to the plaintiff table and placed a comforting hand on Chloe's shoulder. She offered him a weak, trembling smile, playing the grateful survivor to absolute perfection. "Your Honor," Preston said, turning back to the judge. "The plaintiff has presented clear, compelling testimony regarding the brutal nature of this assault. We have established the severe financial, physical, and emotional damages inflicted upon my client. We believe the evidence of the defendant's aggressive, uncompromising nature speaks for itself. The plaintiff rests." Preston took his seat next to Jamal. The courtroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The air was thick with the manufactured narrative they had successfully woven. To anyone sitting in the gallery, to the court reporter, and to the judge, I was completely destroyed. I was a disgraced, violent veteran who had mercilessly attacked her pregnant sister-in-law. My reputation was supposedly in ruins, and my $4 million estate was effectively sitting on a silver platter, waiting for Sterling to legally hand it over. Judge Sterling looked at me, a smug, satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He thought the heavy lifting was done. He thought he had successfully fulfilled his end of the corrupt bargain with Chloe's uncle. He was already mentally calculating the total forgiveness of his $2.5 million real estate debt. "The defense may call its first witness," Judge Sterling announced, waving his hand as if the rest of the trial was a mere formality. "Though I remind Counselor Letitia to keep things brief. The court has a very clear understanding of the events that transpired." Letitia stood up slowly. She buttoned her emerald green suit jacket and smoothed the front of her skirt. She did not look rushed. She did not look intimidated. She looked like a woman who was about to drop a nuclear warhead into a paper shredder. "The defense calls the defendant Maya Evans to the stand," Letitia said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom like a diamond blade. I stood up from my chair. I did not slouch. I did not tremble. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked toward the witness box with the heavy, measured cadence of a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. They wanted to make my military service the center of this trial. They were about to realize that was the greatest mistake they could have possibly made. I stepped out from behind the heavy oak defense table, and the entire courtroom fell into absolute silence. The fabric of my service dress blue uniform moved with crisp, deliberate precision. I had not worn this uniform since my official retirement ceremony, but today it was not just clothing, it was armor. I walked down the center aisle toward the witness box, with my spine perfectly straight and my chin elevated. The polished gold buttons of my jacket gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. The pristine white shirt collar contrasted sharply against my dark skin. The same dark skin my mother Yvonne had spent my entire childhood criticizing. She always told me I needed to soften my appearance to be accepted in polite society. She told me I was too harsh, too intense, and too intimidating to ever truly command respect. She was entirely wrong. As I approached the front of the room, the visual impact of my presence slammed into the jury box like a physical wave. For the past hour, Preston had relentlessly painted me as a feral, unhinged threat. He had weaponized every racist trope in the book to characterize me as a violent, jealous, angry black woman who could not control her militant rage. He wanted the jury to picture a monster. Instead, they were looking at a chief petty officer. Pinned to the left side of my chest was a highly decorated rack of military ribbons. Above them rested my Fleet Marine Force combat warfare device, earned by deploying directly alongside Marine infantry units. And resting at the very top, catching the light for everyone in the room to see, was the Navy Cross. The bailiff, an older black man who had been scowling silently at the wall all morning, suddenly shifted his posture. He stood a little straighter, his eyes locking onto my medals with immediate, profound respect. He handed me the Bible. I placed my left hand on the cover and raised my right hand. As my sleeve shifted slightly, the edge of a jagged burn scar on my wrist became visible, a permanent physical testament to the reality of my service. I swore to tell the whole truth, my voice ringing clear, steady and authoritative through the microphone. I took my seat. I directed my gaze to the plaintiff table. Jamal looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. Growing up, he used to mock my decision to enlist, while he was partying at Morehouse College and draining our parents' bank accounts to lease luxury cars. He called the military the poor man's college route. He thought my service was beneath his fabricated high society lifestyle. Now, seeing me highly decorated and commanding the absolute respect of a federal courtroom, the reality of my achievements seemed to finally pierce through his deep-seated delusion. He shrank back into his chair, suddenly looking very small in his tailored suit. Beside him, Chloe's theatrical performance suffered a catastrophic failure. Her fake sniffling completely stopped. She stared at the gold and bronze medals resting over my heart, her eyes darting nervously toward her lawyer. The modest, pale pink maternity dress she wore to project ultimate fragility suddenly looked exactly like what it was, a cheap, manipulative costume. Preston realized his entire legal strategy was imploding in real time. He had banked heavily on me showing up in a sharp, aggressive corporate suit so he could frame me as a ruthless CEO who bullied her sweet pregnant sister-in-law. Or worse, he desperately hoped I would show up looking agitated and combative, ready to argue with the judge. Instead, I had completely neutralized his offensive by wearing the ultimate symbol of American honor, discipline, and sacrifice. Judge Harrison Sterling stared at me from the high bench. His face was a mask of cold, rigid fury. I was actively disrupting his rigged game. He knew he could not easily dismiss or demean a highly decorated combat veteran in full dress uniform without drawing severe unwanted scrutiny, even from a corrupt judicial appeals board. He gripped his heavy wooden gavel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. He was trapped and he knew it. Letitia walked up to the podium for my direct examination. She did not rush. She deliberately let the silence stretch for a few seconds, allowing the jury to fully absorb the sheer weight of my presence. When she finally spoke, her voice was warm, steady, and deeply respectful. "Please state your name, your final military rank, and your service record for the court," Letitia instructed. I leaned into the microphone. I stated my name and my final rank as Hospital Corpsman Chief. I detailed my deployment history. I spoke of Fallujah, Helmand Province, and running mobile trauma units in the middle of active hostile territory. I did not brag. I spoke with the clinical, detached precision of a medical professional who had seen the absolute worst of humanity and survived it by maintaining total emotional control. Every single word I spoke methodically dismantled Chloe's lies. Chloe had just spent an hour weeping on the stand, claiming that a scraped knee and a clumsy fall on soft grass was a severe, debilitating trauma. I was talking about triaging bilateral amputations under heavy mortar fire. I was talking about keeping terrified, bleeding Marines calm while the world literally burned around us. The jurors were visibly doing the math in their heads. I could see the shift in their eyes. The contrast was utterly devastating. Preston had asked them to believe that a woman who held the fragile lives of American soldiers in her hands, a woman who possessed the supreme psychological discipline required to operate in a war zone, had suddenly lost her mind and violently shoved a pregnant woman off a porch over a petty family argument. The narrative went from dramatic to completely laughable in less than 5 minutes. I explained my role as a crisis manager, detailing how my entire professional and military career was built onto escalating violence, not creating it. I looked directly at the jury box and explained that my training requires me to assess threats and neutralize them with minimal collateral damage. If I wanted to physically harm someone, I stated calmly, my voice steady and unwavering, I would not resort to pushing them into my landscaping. I am trained in advanced hand-to-hand combat. I do not lose my temper, Your Honor. I control the chaos. A heavy, suffocating weight settled over the plaintiff table. Preston's face had gone a sickly shade of gray. He was losing the jury rapidly, and he knew he had to do something drastic to regain control of the room. He could not attack my testimony without looking like a monster, so he had to attack the visual symbol that was currently destroying his case. He had to attack the uniform itself. Preston scrambled to his feet so fast, his heavy leather chair scraped loudly against the polished floorboards. He could not allow me to speak for another second. He had watched the jury lean forward, completely engrossed in my testimony. He saw the exact moment his fabricated narrative of an unstable, angry veteran began to dissolve into absolute dust. He needed to shatter the image of disciplined authority I was projecting, and he needed to do it immediately. "Objection, Your Honor!" Preston shouted, his voice echoing with a sharp, desperate edge. He gestured aggressively toward the witness stand. "The plaintiff strongly objects to this entire display. The defendant is intentionally manipulating the jury by wearing a military uniform to a civil proceeding. This is highly irregular, entirely prejudicial, and designed strictly to intimidate my fragile client." Letitia stood up with a slow, deliberate grace. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Your Honor, my client served 20 years in the United States Navy and retired with an honorable discharge. Federal regulations explicitly permit veterans to wear their dress uniforms on occasions of ceremony and dignity, which includes giving sworn testimony in a court of law. Her attire is completely legal, highly respectful of this institution, and entirely appropriate." Preston was practically vibrating with panic. He stepped out from behind the plaintiff table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "It is a cheap theatrical prop, Your Honor. She is not here out of respect. She is here to project militant dominance. Look at the hardware pinned to her chest." He turned to the jury box, his voice dripping with manufactured outrage. "My client is a traumatized, expecting mother who is already terrified of the defendant. And how does the defendant respond? By showing up wearing an aggressive display of military force. That specific medal," he pointed directly at my Navy Cross, "is a combat decoration. It represents warfare. It represents violence. She is wearing a symbol of lethal force, specifically to trigger my client's severe post-traumatic stress." "Right on cue." Chloe gasped and shrank back into her chair. She pulled her cardigan tightly around her shoulders and buried her face against Jamal's arm, acting as though the brass and ribbon on my jacket were radiating physical heat. Jamal wrapped both arms around her, glaring at me with a look of absolute betrayal, playing the role of the protective husband, shielding his wife from a dangerous predator. I sat motionless in the witness box. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect echoing through the courtroom was staggering. The Navy Cross is the second highest military decoration awarded for valor in combat. It is not handed out for aggressive behavior. It is awarded for extraordinary heroism and extreme sacrifice in the face of imminent death. To call it a cheap theatrical prop was not just an insult to me. It was a desecration of every single service member who had bled on a battlefield. But Preston did not care about honor, and neither did Judge Harrison Sterling. Sterling leaned over the heavy wooden bench, his silver hair catching the courtroom lights. He looked down at me with an expression of profound, naked contempt. He had been searching for an excuse to strip away my dignity from the moment I walked through the double doors, and Preston had just handed him the perfect hammer. "I am inclined to agree with the plaintiff," Judge Sterling growled, his gravelly voice dripping with venom. "This courtroom is not a parade ground, Miss Evans. We are here to resolve a civil dispute regarding an unprovoked violent assault on a pregnant woman. You are not here to put on a militant fashion show, and you will not use tactical intimidation tactics in my presence." Letitia stepped forward, her eyes flashing with cold fire. "Your Honor, you cannot dictate a veteran's legal right to wear their earned decorations. This is a blatant violation of her rights and a deep disrespect to her service. The medal stays." Judge Sterling slammed his heavy wooden gavel onto the sounding block. The sharp crack rang out like a gunshot. "You are bordering on contempt." Counselor Sterling barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "I control the decorum in this room." The plaintiff is visibly distressed by this aggressive display of military hardware. The defendant is intentionally cultivating a hostile environment, which only further validates the plaintiff's claims of emotional trauma. He turned his burning gaze back to me. He wanted to break me. He wanted to force me into submission, to make me bow before Chloe and Jamal in front of a jury of my peers. He thought that by stripping away the physical symbols of my achievements, he could reduce me back to the helpless, obedient scapegoat my family had always demanded I be. "Take that piece of metal off your uniform," Judge Sterling ordered, his voice echoing off the high ceiling like a crack of thunder. It is an offensive disruption to these proceedings, and quite frankly, given your highly documented history of erratic behavior, I severely doubt the authenticity of that specific decoration. Remove it immediately, or I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiff strip it from your chest himself." The entire courtroom inhaled a sharp collective breath. The heavy silence that followed was deafening. The court reporter stopped typing. The jury members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their eyes darting between the judge and the heavy brass cross resting above my heart. Even Preston looked momentarily stunned by the sheer unhinged venom pouring from the bench. Doubt the authenticity. The words reverberated in my mind. I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle. But behind my steady eyes, the polished mahogany walls of the Fulton County Courthouse completely vanished. The crisp, air-conditioned breeze of the room was instantly replaced by the suffocating 120-degree heat of Helmand Province. The oppressive silence was swallowed by the deafening, earth-shattering roar of an improvised explosive device detonating directly beneath our armored transport. I could see the blinding flash of orange fire. I could feel the concussive shockwaves slamming into my chest, rattling my teeth in my skull. I could smell the thick, choking black smoke, the burning diesel fuel, and the sharp, undeniable copper scent of fresh blood. I was 22 years old again, wearing 80 pounds of Kevlar and ceramic body armor. The transport vehicle was a twisted, flaming cage of jagged metal. The insurgent gunfire was cracking against the hull like deadly hail, kicking up plumes of blinding white sand. My comms unit was screaming with chaotic tactical chatter, but all I could hear were the agonizing cries of the Marines trapped inside that burning metal coffin. I did not think about my own life. I did not think about my safety. I sprinted directly into the flames. I remembered the searing heat blistering my eyebrows and melting the rubber grips on my tactical gloves. I remembered my boots slipping on pooling transmission fluid and blood as I grabbed Corporal Miller by the drag handle of his tactical vest. He was a 220-pound infantryman carrying 60 pounds of gear, and I dragged his dead weight out of the inferno purely on adrenaline and raw screaming desperation. I went back into that blazing transport 3 more times. I pulled out Hernandez. I pulled out Washington. I pulled out Jackson. My uniform was scorched black. My hands were ripped open and my lungs were burning from inhaling toxic smoke. I knelt in the blistering sand under heavy enemy fire, applying tourniquets, packing catastrophic wounds with combat gauze, and refusing to let a single one of my brothers die in the dirt. That was authentic trauma. That was real, uncompromising terror. That was the profound, soul-crushing weight of sacrifice. My vision snapped back to the cold, sterile reality of the courtroom. I looked at the people sitting before me. I looked at my brother Jamal, a man who was perfectly willing to commit perjury and throw his own sister into a legal firing squad simply because he lacked the discipline to stop swiping his credit cards. He was a man who wanted a $4 million estate handed to him on a silver platter because he felt entitled to the fruits of my labor. I looked at Chloe, a woman pretending to be a traumatized victim, burying her face in a tissue without shedding a single tear. She was attempting to steal my home and destroy my name because she had tripped over her own designer heels on a manicured lawn. She was weaponizing her fragility because she lacked the basic human decency to take accountability for her own financial ruin. And I looked at Judge Harrison Sterling, a man who had sworn a sacred oath to uphold the law and dispense blind justice. Yet here he was actively prostituting his judicial power to a private equity firm, deliberately corrupting a federal court, just to erase his own pathetic failure in the real estate market. They were absolute cowards. Every single one of them. They had zero concept of duty. They knew absolutely nothing about courage, about bleeding for the person standing next to you, or about putting someone else's life above your own comfort. They were leeches, parasites who fed off the strength of others because they possessed absolutely none of their own. Sterling thought he was breaking me. He thought that by ordering me to remove my Navy Cross, he was stripping away my dignity and exposing me as the helpless, obedient scapegoat my family had always treated me as. He fundamentally misunderstood what that medal meant. The brass and the ribbon did not give me my strength. The medal was just a symbol of the fire I had already walked through. Taking it off would not erase the lives I saved, and it certainly would not save him from the absolute destruction I was about to unleash on his courtroom. Letitia stood up from the defense table. Her chair scraped violently against the floor. She was shaking with barely contained rage, her eyes blazing with a fierce protective fury. I knew exactly what she was about to do. She was going to demand an immediate recess, file an emergency motion for recusal, and threaten to bring the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee down on Sterling's head right then and there. I reached out and placed my hand firmly over hers. I pressed down, stopping her before she could utter a single syllable. I caught her eye. I gave her a slow, deliberate, microscopic nod. I needed her to trust my tactical command. The enemy was overextending their supply lines, completely drunk on their perceived power. I did not want to stop them. I wanted them to walk right off the cliff. I turned my attention back to Judge Sterling. My face remained perfectly impassive. The trap was fully primed, and I was entirely willing to play my part to spring it. Yes, Your Honor. The words left my lips with a terrifying absolute calm. I did not raise my voice by a single fraction of a decibel. I did not argue the law, and I did not demand basic human respect. I simply maintained direct, unwavering eye contact with Judge Harrison Sterling as I raised my right hand to my chest. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the low, mechanical hum of the air conditioning vents. Every eye in the gallery, the jury box, and the plaintiff table was locked onto my fingers. I grasped the heavy brass backing of the Navy Cross. I did not tremble. I did not hesitate. In the military, you are taught that your uniform is a sacred reflection of your service, and your medals are the physical embodiment of the blood you shed for your country. But sitting in this sterile, corrupt courtroom, I recognized the profound difference between honor and ego. Judge Sterling wanted to strip my honor. He thought his order would humiliate me. He believed that forcing a black combat veteran to publicly dismantle her uniform for the comfort of a wealthy, fragile white woman would finally break my spirit. He fundamentally misunderstood the source of my power. My power did not live in the brass and ribbon pinned over my heart. My power lived in my mind, in my discipline, and in my absolute refusal to surrender control of the battlefield. I unclasped the pin. The metal felt cold against my fingertips. I lowered my hand and placed the Navy Cross directly onto the polished wooden ledge of the witness box. The heavy metal made a sharp, distinct click against the timber. The sound rang out like a judge's gavel. I folded my hands back into my lap. I sat perfectly straight, my breathing slow and rhythmic. I looked at Judge Sterling. "The decoration has been removed, Your Honor." I stated, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Judge Sterling leaned back in his high leather chair, his chest puffing out beneath his heavy black robes. He exhaled a long, deep breath of sheer self-satisfaction. He truly believed he had just tamed a wild animal. He thought he had successfully asserted his absolute dominance over the aggressive, intimidating black CEO. The furious scowl on his face melted into a smug, arrogant sneer. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at me, as if I had just knelt before his bench and begged for mercy. I shifted my gaze to the plaintiff table. Chloe still had the crumpled tissue pressed against her mouth, playing the role of the terrified, traumatized victim for the jury. But from my elevated vantage point in the witness box, the angle was perfect. She lowered the tissue just a fraction of an inch, hiding her mouth from the jury, but exposing it directly to me. A sharp, vindictive smirk spread across her face. Her eyes locked onto mine, glittering with malicious, unrestrained triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated the justice system to break her wealthy sister-in-law. She was already mentally measuring the windows of my $4 million estate for new drapes. She was calculating how quickly she could clear her massive credit card debt once the deed was transferred into her name. Beside her, Jamal finally looked up. He saw the Navy Cross sitting isolated on the wooden ledge. For a fleeting, microscopic second, I saw a flash of genuine, sickening shame cross his features. He knew exactly what that cross meant. He knew I had almost burned to death in the desert sand to earn it. He knew the cost of that medal, and he knew he had just allowed a corrupt judge to desecrate it to cover his own financial incompetence. But his shame was quickly swallowed by his absolute cowardice. Jamal looked away, staring down at his expensive leather shoes. He chose his fabricated high society lifestyle over his own sister's dignity. He sold my blood for a bailout. Preston adjusted his tailored suit jacket, looking incredibly relieved. He turned back to the judge, a confident smile returning to his face. He thought he had successfully neutralized the threat. He thought the visual of me submitting to the judge's authority had solidified his narrative that I was a dangerous individual who needed to be heavily policed and controlled. But as I looked past the plaintiff table, I saw something Preston had completely missed. I looked at the jury box. The 12 men and women sitting in those chairs did not look triumphant. They did not look relieved. They looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. They were everyday citizens, and they had just watched a federal judge force a highly decorated military medic to strip off her combat valor medal to appease a woman who claimed she was intimidated by a piece of brass. The sheer, overwhelming disrespect of the moment had visibly shifted the energy in the room. They were beginning to see the cracks in the facade. They were beginning to realize that the hostility radiating from the bench was not justice. It was an execution. I looked back at Letitia. She was sitting at the defense table, her posture rigid, watching me with absolute unwavering focus. She saw the trap I had just laid. By complying with Sterling's blatantly abusive order without a single argument, I had given him enough rope to hang himself. We had just cemented his extreme unreasonable bias onto the public court record. He had overplayed his hand, completely drunk on his own perceived power. We had let them climb to the absolute highest peak of their delusion. They had built a towering castle of lies constructed on a foundation of fake tears, corrupt judicial favors, and staggering financial desperation. They thought I was a helpless victim trapped in their courtroom. They had no idea they were the targets trapped in mine. Judge Sterling waved his hand dismissively in my direction, clearly bored now that he had extracted my submission. He turned his attention to the defense table. Counselor Sterling barked, his tone dripping with condescension. You may begin your cross-examination of the defendant, and I strongly suggest you keep your questions strictly relevant to the civil matters at hand. I will not entertain any further theatrical displays in my courtroom. Letitia stood up. She did not grab a legal pad. She did not gather a stack of papers. She simply buttoned her emerald green suit jacket and walked slowly toward the center of the room. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, deliberate and unhurried. She stopped perfectly center, framing herself between the jury box and the witness stand. She looked at Chloe. She looked at Jamal. She looked at Judge Sterling. The professional restrained mask she had worn all morning completely vanished. A cold, predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. The game was over. The trap was springing shut. Letitia did not begin by asking me about the cookout. She did not ask me about my relationship with my brother, or the argument on the patio, or the fabricated shove down the stairs. She completely ignored the emotional minefield Preston had just spent the last 2 hours meticulously planting. Ms. Evans, Letitia began, her voice projecting clearly to the back row of the gallery. Let us establish some foundational facts about the property where this alleged incident took place. You are the sole owner of the estate in question, correct? Yes, I replied, my voice steady and amplified by the microphone. I purchased the property 2 years ago. And given the nature of your profession as the CEO of Vanguard Aegis, a high-threat crisis management firm, I assume you do not treat your personal security lightly, Letitia asked, pacing slowly back toward the defense table. I do not, I answered. My firm handles highly sensitive corporate intelligence. As a standard protocol, my primary residence is equipped with a comprehensive enterprise-grade security infrastructure. Preston stood up from the plaintiff table, an annoyed, dismissive look on his face. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. The plaintiff has already established that an assault occurred on the property. The defendant's paranoia and excessive home security measures have absolutely no bearing on the fact that she violently attacked my client. Judge Sterling leaned heavily on his gavel, glaring down at Letitia. Sustained. Counselor, I warned you about wasting this court's time. Get to the events of the assault or sit down. Letitia did not even flinch. She simply tilted her head, maintaining her predatory smile. Your Honor, the plaintiff has made several very specific claims regarding the precise location, the angle, and the force of the alleged push on my client's front porch. To properly evaluate those claims, the jury must understand the physical environment and the objective monitoring systems present at that exact location. It goes directly to the physical evidence of the event. Sterling scowled, clearly unhappy with her flawless legal logic. He waved his hand with a sharp, irritated motion. Tread carefully, counselor. I will allow a brief line of questioning regarding the property, but you will move on quickly. Thank you, Your Honor, Letitia said, turning her sharp gaze back to me. Ms. Evans, could you please describe the specific security monitoring systems installed at the front entrance of your estate? I looked directly at the jury box. I wanted them to hear every single technical specification. The perimeter of my estate, particularly the front gate, the driveway, the wraparound porch, and the primary entrance, is monitored by a closed-circuit military-grade surveillance system, I stated clearly. These are not standard commercial doorbells. They are continuous recording high-definition 4K cameras with overlapping fields of vision. There are no blind spots on my front porch. The system records audio and video at 60 frames per second, and the data is instantly uploaded to an encrypted off-site cloud server managed directly by my firm. The moment the words left my mouth, the atmosphere at the plaintiff table fundamentally shifted. I watched Preston freeze. The pen in his hand stopped moving. His eyes darted from me to Letitia and then slowly down to the thick manila envelope sitting on the defense table. The realization of what he had just walked his client into was hitting him like a freight train. He had not subpoenaed my security footage during discovery because Chloe had sworn to him that there were no cameras. She had looked around my historic colonial-style house and assumed it was just old brick and wood. She did not realize the tiny discreet domes tucked under the eaves of the porch were active lenses. Beside him, Jamal's posture completely collapsed. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He knew exactly where he had been standing when Chloe tripped. He knew exactly what those cameras would show. Chloe, however, was still trying to play her part. She clutched her tissue, looking back and forth between her lawyer and the judge, not fully comprehending the technological snare that had just snapped shut around her ankles. She thought her tears and her pregnancy were enough to override objective reality. So, to be absolutely clear for the record, Letitia continued, her voice rising slightly to command the absolute attention of the room. If a physical altercation took place on your front porch, if someone was violently shoved down your stone steps, as the plaintiff claims, your security system would have captured the entire event in high-definition video and audio. Yes, I replied, never breaking eye contact with the jury. It would capture every second of it from 3 different angles. Preston shot to his feet, his chair screeching violently against the floor. Panic was radiating off him in palpable waves. He finally understood that he had built his entire career-defining lawsuit on the perjured testimony of a desperate, broke woman. Objection! Preston shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Your Honor, this is ambush by trial. The defense never produced any video evidence during the discovery phase. They cannot introduce phantom footage now to confuse the jury. Letitia turned on her heel to face him, her expression perfectly composed. Your Honor, opposing counsel never requested security footage during discovery because his client explicitly swore in her deposition that no cameras were present. The defense is under no obligation to correct opposing counsel's failure to conduct a proper investigation. Furthermore, we submitted a supplemental evidence log to the court clerk precisely 48 hours ago, well within the legal parameters for rebuttal evidence. If opposing counsel failed to review his updated docket, that is his own professional negligence. Judge Sterling's face drained of color. He looked down at the digital docket monitor embedded in his bench. He rapidly clicked his mouse, his eyes widening as he found the supplemental filing. Letitia had quietly slipped into the record while he was too busy having private phone calls with Chloe's uncle. The corrupt judge suddenly realized he was presiding over a live grenade. The evidence was properly filed, Your Honor, Letitia stated, leaving absolutely no room for debate, and it goes directly to the absolute core of the plaintiff's perjured testimony. Judge Sterling swallowed hard. He looked at Uncle Clayton's lawyer, Preston, who was now sweating visibly through his expensive suit. Sterling knew that if he suppressed legally filed, highly relevant video evidence in front of a jury, it would be an immediate glaring ground for a federal appeal. He was trapped by the very legal system he was trying to manipulate. "Objection overruled," Sterling muttered through gritted teeth, looking as though the words physically burned his throat. "The defense may proceed." Letitia smiled. It was a cold, absolute victory. She turned back to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Ms. Evans," Letitia said, her voice echoing in the dead-silent courtroom. "Did your security cameras capture the events that took place on your front porch 14 days ago?" "Yes, they did," I answered. Letitia walked over to the evidence cart and picked up a small encrypted flash drive. She held it up for the entire room to see. "Your Honor," Letitia announced, her tone ringing with absolute finality. "The defense would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence and project the footage onto the courtroom monitors." The dominoes were lined up. It was time to push them over. Letitia walked to the center of the room. She stood right in front of the jury box, holding a small remote control in her right hand. She didn't look at the defense table. She looked directly at Judge Sterling. "Your Honor, the defense offers into evidence Defendant's Exhibit A, the unedited surveillance footage from my client's front porch on the afternoon in question." Sterling's face contorted into an ugly, panic-stricken sneer. He started to speak, but Letitia had already pressed the button. The large flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The footage wasn't grainy. It wasn't the blurry black-and-white security camera footage people expected. It was crystal-clear military-grade 4K resolution. The color was vivid, the details razor-sharp. The camera had been positioned seamlessly under the eaves of the porch, providing an unobstructed sweeping view of the heavy mahogany front door, the entire length of the stone steps, and the plush green lawn stretching out to the driveway. The courtroom fell silent as the video began to play. There I was, standing in the open doorway, perfectly calm. I didn't look unhinged or aggressive. I looked exactly like what I was, a professional woman, firmly ending a highly toxic interaction on her own property. I was pointing toward the front gate. The audio was pristine, picking up every single word. "You are not getting my house. You are not getting my money. And you are no longer welcome here. Get your things and leave immediately." The video clearly showed my parents, Yvonne and Calvin, turning and walking away, dragging their bags. It showed Jamal grabbing Chloe by the arm and leading her down the steps. The camera then caught me taking a slow, steady step back into the foyer. I closed my heavy front door. The loud, distinct click of the deadbolt locking echoed across the courtroom speakers. I was no longer outside. I was inside, behind a locked door, completely removed from the situation. But the video didn't stop there. The camera angle shifted slightly, focusing entirely on Chloe and Jamal walking down the pathway. The jury watched in high-definition silence. Chloe, strutting in her cheap stilettos, turned her head back to glare at the locked door. She missed the edge of the paver. Her heel caught her ankle, wobbled, and with a sharp yelp she stumbled off the path and fell onto the soft grass. She landed on her hands and knees. The microphone caught Jamal's voice. "Chloe, baby, are you okay?" Chloe sat up. The jury watched as she examined her knee, finding a microscopic scrape. They saw her look up at Jamal, and then the camera captured the exact moment Chloe's face shifted. The frantic, exaggerated wailing began. "My baby Jamal, she pushed me off the porch." The murmurs began in the back of the gallery and rapidly swelled into a loud, undeniable hum of shock. The jurors were shifting in their seats, exchanging wide-eyed looks of utter disbelief. One juror covered her mouth with her hand. The illusion was shattered. The entire foundation of the plaintiff's case, the dramatic, violent assault by an unhinged combat veteran, was exposed as a complete, orchestrated lie. Chloe sat frozen at the plaintiff table. The crumpled tissue dropped from her trembling fingers. Her face drained of all color, replacing her carefully manufactured fragility with sheer naked terror. The Oscar-worthy performance collapsed in an instant. She looked like a trapped animal staring down the barrel of a loaded rifle. Jamal swallowed hard, shrinking into his seat. His hands, previously resting protectively over Chloe's, were now clenched tightly in his lap. He couldn't look at the screen. He couldn't look at the jury. The golden boy of the family had been caught committing blatant, undeniable perjury on federal record. Preston, their high-priced lawyer, looked like he was going to be physically sick. He slumped back into his chair, rubbing his forehead with trembling hands. He had staked his reputation on this case, and Letitia had just detonated his career. Judge Harrison Sterling slammed his gavel repeatedly, desperate to regain control over the rapidly disintegrating courtroom. Order. Order in this court. The murmurs slowly died down, but the heavy tension in the room was suffocating. Counselor Sterling barked at Letitia, his voice cracking with panic. What is the meaning of this? You cannot just drop surprise video evidence in the middle of a trial. Letitia remained perfectly calm, turning to face the bench. It is not a surprise, Your Honor. The video was submitted into the supplemental evidence log 48 hours ago, as I previously stated. It directly contradicts the sworn testimony provided by the plaintiff and her key witness. The defense submits that the plaintiff's entire claim is fraudulent, fabricated entirely for financial extortion. Sterling's eyes darted frantically around the room. He realized the trap he was caught in. He couldn't suppress the footage now. The jury had already seen it. He couldn't dismiss it as irrelevant, because it was the only objective record of the event. If he tried to rule in Chloe's favor now, it would be a blatant miscarriage of justice, a ruling that would trigger an immediate high-profile federal investigation. But if he ruled against Chloe, Uncle Clayton would not forgive his $2.5 million real estate debt. I was financially ruined either way. The corrupt judge stared down at Letitia, realizing he had been outplayed on every conceivable level. Letitia stepped closer to the bench, lowering her voice so only Sterling could hear the next phase of the assault. Your Honor, the defense is not finished, Letitia said, her tone icy and sharp. I have one more piece of evidence to submit directly to the bench. It goes to the very integrity of these proceedings. Letitia reached into her sleek leather briefcase and withdrew a slim manila folder. This particular folder was bound with a bright red security seal. In Vanguard, Aegis Corporate Protocol. A red seal means the intelligence inside is verified, highly classified, and absolutely lethal to the target. She stepped up to the wooden partition of the bench and handed the sealed folder directly to Judge Harrison Sterling. I submit Defendant Exhibit B for the court's immediate review. Letitia said, her voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp pitch. This document is for Your Honor's eyes only, at this exact moment, though fully certified copies have already been prepared for the appropriate federal oversight authorities. Sterling frowned, his hands visibly trembling as he broke the red seal. He flipped open the folder. I watched his eyes track across the top page. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched the arrogant, untouchable aura of a corrupt federal judge shatter into a million irreparable pieces in real time. The document resting in his shaking hands was a certified financial ledger. Malik, my lead forensic accountant, had worked through the night, tracing a very specific, highly concealed offshore wire transfer. Exactly 3 days before this trial commenced, a boutique shell corporation wired exactly $50,000 into a supposedly blind political action committee. That committee was solely dedicated to the re-election campaign of Judge Harrison Sterling. The shell corporation making the generous campaign donation was a registered subsidiary of Heritage Holdings. Heritage Holdings was the private equity firm owned entirely by Chloe's uncle, Clayton Montgomery. Uncle Clayton had not just bought Sterling's $2.5 million real estate debt to hold over his head like a guillotine. He had paid the judge a $50,000 cash advance to guarantee a favorable verdict. He paid him to ensure that my $4 million estate would be legally stripped from me and handed over to his broke, desperate niece. It was not just a conflict of interest. It was textbook judicial bribery. It was a severe federal crime, and we had the receipts printed in high-definition ink. Sterling looked up from the folder. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the distinct click of the detonator beneath his heel. His mouth hung open slightly, but no sound came out. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He looked past Letitia and locked eyes with me. I did not blink. I offered him the exact same cold, uncompromising stare he had given me when he ordered me to strip my Navy Cross from my uniform. He thought he could use his power to humiliate a black woman in his courtroom. He thought my combat record made me a wild, unthinking animal. He failed to realize that combat teaches you how to identify the weakest point in an enemy stronghold and strike it with devastating precision. The defense formally requests an immediate directed verdict dismissing all claims with prejudice, Letitia stated calmly, leaning her weight against the heavy wood of the bench. We also request that Your Honor immediately recuse yourself from any further proceedings involving my client, due to the severe, highly documented financial conflicts of interest currently resting in your hands. Sterling swallowed hard. The silence in the room was absolute. He knew exactly what Letitia was doing. She was giving him an ultimatum. If he tried to push back, if he tried to strike the evidence from the record, or hold us in contempt, Vanguard Aegis would release the financial dossiers to the press and the federal prosecutors before the court even recessed for lunch. He was trapped in a cage built entirely by his own greed. Preston stood up from the plaintiff table looking utterly lost. He adjusted his expensive tie, trying to regain control of a room that had completely slipped through his fingers. Your Honor, the plaintiff has a fundamental right to review any evidence submitted to the bench. What exactly is in that folder? Sit down, Counselor Sterling snapped, his voice cracking with absolute terror. He was not protecting Preston. He was trying to protect himself. Sterling knew that if Preston saw the wire transfers, the lawyer would be legally obligated to report the bribery to the State Ethics Board just to save his own license. Sterling was completely isolated, cut off from his allies, and rapidly sinking. Chloe looked back and forth between her lawyer and the judge, her panic escalating into genuine unscripted fear. The fake tears were long gone. Jamal wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. They knew their fake injury scam had just been destroyed by the porch security footage, but they had absolutely no idea about the massive judicial corruption scheme happening right above their heads. They were small-time grifters who had unwittingly walked into a federal bribery sting operated by a highly trained corporate intelligence firm. They thought they were using the legal system to trap a scapegoat. They did not realize I had weaponized their own greed to dismantle the entire system protecting them. Letitia took a slow, deliberate step back from the judge's bench. She turned slightly, looking toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. The final phase of our operation was primed and ready to launch. I had promised my family a war when they tried to extort me on my front porch, and I was about to bring the full devastating weight of the federal government crashing down on their heads. Judge Sterling raised his heavy wooden gavel, a desperate, pathetic attempt to assert authority over a room that no longer belonged to him. He wanted to strike the sounding block. He wanted to declare an immediate recess, flee to his private chambers, and shred every single document linking him to Heritage Holdings and Chloe's uncle. But before the wood could even begin its descent, a tall man wearing a sharp, dark suit stood up from the very back row of the gallery. The man did not shout, but he spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of the federal government. Judge Harrison Sterling, you are instructed to step away from the bench immediately. The man reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a leather holder, flipping it open to display a gleaming silver badge. He was a special investigator with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically attached to the Public Corruption Task Force. My crisis management firm had handed his division the entire financial dossier on a silver platter 48 hours ago. We gave them the offshore routing numbers, the shell company documents, and the precise timestamp of the $50,000 judicial bribe. Sitting directly beside the federal agent were two individuals whose presence commanded absolute, uncompromising respect. They stood up in unison. They were high-ranking naval officers wearing their immaculate service dress blue uniforms. One was a captain, the other a commander. They were men I had served alongside in the blistering, unforgiving heat of the desert. They were commanders who had witnessed firsthand the blood, grit, and extreme sacrifice it took to earn the Navy Cross currently sitting abandoned on the witness stand ledge. They had flown to Atlanta the moment I called them, arriving in this courtroom to stand in silent, immovable solidarity with their combat medic. Judge Sterling looked at the federal agent. He looked at the naval officers. The gavel slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting his desk with a dull, defeated thud. He collapsed back into his high leather chair, burying his face in his hands. He knew it was completely over. There was no political action committee, no private equity firm, and no amount of corrupt maneuvering that could save him from a federal indictment for judicial bribery. At the plaintiff table, the illusion of the delicate, traumatized victim violently shattered. Chloe realized that the corrupt judge who was supposed to hand her the deed to my $4 million estate was currently being read his rights. The modest pink maternity dress suddenly looked entirely ridiculous as her true toxic personality clawed its way to the surface. "Do something!" Chloe shrieked, dropping her tear-soaked tissue and slapping the heavy mahogany table. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and completely unhinged. She grabbed Jamal by the arm, her manicured nails digging deep into his expensive suit jacket. "Jamal, fix this right now. You promised me this was going to work. You promised me we would get the house." Jamal did not move. He sat paralyzed in his chair, staring blankly at the federal agent walking down the center aisle of the courtroom. The golden boy who had spent his entire life insulated from consequences by our parents was finally facing a reality he could not manipulate. There was no emergency retirement fund Yvonne and Calvin could drain to buy his way out of federal extortion and perjury charges. His illusion of wealth was dead. The crushing weight of his $150,000 credit card debt was about to be eclipsed by the very real threat of a federal prison sentence. "Jamal!" Chloe screamed again, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure rage. She abandoned the soft, terrified victim persona, entirely glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. "She set us up. Your crazy sister set a trap." I did not smile. I did not gloat. I sat in the witness box with the perfect restrained posture of a chief petty officer. "I did not set a trap, Chloe," I stated clearly, my voice easily carrying over her hysterical shouting. "I simply installed security cameras on my own property and monitored my own financial assets. You are the ones who chose to commit perjury on a federal record. You built the cage. I just locked the door." Preston, the high-priced attorney who had spent the entire morning trying to assassinate my character with racist and sexist microaggressions, was already backing away from the plaintiff table. He was stuffing his legal files into his briefcase with frantic, uncoordinated movements. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a client who had just dragged him into the center of a federal bribery scandal. He knew his legal license was hanging by a microscopic thread. Chloe lunged toward him, grabbing the handle of his briefcase. "You are our lawyer," she demanded, her voice echoing frantically. "Do your job. Tell them she is lying." Preston ripped his briefcase from her grasp with ruthless force. "I am officially withdrawing as your counsel," he hissed, his face pale with absolute panic. "You lied to me about the security footage. You fabricated your injuries. And you dragged me into a courtroom controlled by a bribed official. Do not ever contact my firm again." He turned on his heel and practically sprinted up the center aisle, pushing past the gallery doors to escape the blast radius of their sinking ship. The two naval officers did not stay in the back of the room. They stepped out of the gallery and walked down the center aisle with precise, synchronized strides. They bypassed the plaintiff table entirely, not giving Jamal or Chloe a single passing glance. They stopped directly in front of the witness box. The captain reached out and picked up my Navy Cross from the wooden ledge. He held it with profound reverence. He looked at me, gave a sharp formal nod, and extended his hand, offering the medal back to its rightful owner. I took the brass cross from his palm and pinned it securely back onto the left side of my uniform jacket. The symbol of my service was restored directly in the face of the people who had tried to desecrate it. In the front row of the gallery, my parents were experiencing a catastrophic reality check. Yvonne had leapt to her feet when the federal agent displayed his badge. Her hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. She watched the golden boy she had sacrificed everything for crumbling under the weight of his own arrogant crimes. Calvin stood beside her, frozen in shock, finally realizing that enabling Jamal's reckless behavior had not protected him. It had simply handed him the rope to hang himself. The federal investigator approached the bench, accompanied by two armed courtroom bailiffs, who had quickly realized their loyalties belonged to the law, not to the corrupt man wearing the black robe. "Judge Sterling," the agent said, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "we need you to step down and accompany us to the federal building." Sterling did not argue. He stood up on shaking legs, his shoulders slumped in total devastating defeat, and allowed himself to be escorted off the bench. The untouchable authority he had tried to wield over me had dissolved into absolute ruin. I watched him walk away, knowing that the empire of lies my family had built to tear me down had just been completely, irrevocably obliterated. With Judge Sterling being physically escorted through the heavy wooden doors, the courtroom descended into absolute chaos. The remaining court staff looked completely paralyzed, unsure of how to process the federal dismantling of their presiding judge. Letitia did not miss a single beat. She turned directly to the court reporter, ensuring the microphone captured her every word. She formally renewed her motion for a directed verdict and immediate dismissal with prejudice due to the egregious, highly documented fraud occurring on the plaintiff's side. An administrative judge summoned by the federal agents to temporarily secure the room took the bench 10 minutes later and officially struck the entire lawsuit from the public record. The case was dead on arrival. I watched the bailiffs secure the evidence. Chloe and Jamal finally realized they needed to leave. Jamal grabbed Chloe by the arm, trying to pull her toward the center aisle, but their escape route was already blocked. The second federal investigator stepped directly into their path. He did not ask them to sit down. He commanded it. He informed Chloe that the federal government was formally charging her with perjury, filing false legal documents, and extortion. She was not leaving the courthouse to go back to her luxury apartment. She was being detained for immediate processing. Chloe screamed. She thrashed against the bailiffs who stepped forward to escort her away, demanding that her uncle fix the situation. She shouted that she was an expecting mother, that she had rights, that she came from a powerful family. None of it mattered. The federal agents were entirely immune to her weaponized fragility. They calmly read her rights and walked her out the side door, leaving Jamal standing utterly alone in the center of the courtroom. My brother looked at me. His eyes were wide, completely stripped of the arrogant, entitled sheen he had worn his entire life. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to apologize, but I simply turned my back to him. I shook hands with the naval officers who had stood by my side, thanking them for their unwavering support. Letitia packed her briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp, satisfying sound. We walked out of the courtroom, leaving Jamal to navigate the wreckage of his own life. The financial dominoes fell with terrifying speed over the next 72 hours. Without the massive multi-million-dollar settlement they had banked, their entire survival on Jamal and Chloe hit a concrete wall of debt. The creditors stopped calling and started acting. Jamal's leased Mercedes-Benz was repossessed right out of the courthouse parking lot before he even finished paying Chloe's bail. He was forced to take a public bus back to an apartment they no longer legally owned. 3 days later, the bank finalized the foreclosure on their downtown luxury apartment. Jamal and Chloe were given 48 hours to vacate the premises. They had absolutely nowhere to go. Their joint bank accounts were completely frozen, running on empty, and buried under $150,000 of high-interest credit card debt. With federal extortion charges hanging over Chloe's head and the legal fees mounting by the hour, they were left with a single devastating option. They were forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The Golden Boy and the Southern Belle were legally and financially destitute. Chloe immediately turned to her family for a bailout. She assumed her Uncle Clayton and her so-called old money relatives would rally the wagons to protect their aristocratic image. She assumed entirely wrong. Uncle Clayton was currently fighting off a massive federal indictment of his own. The FBI had raided the corporate offices of Heritage Holdings, seizing hard drives, ledgers, and offshore routing documents linked to the judicial bribery scandal. To save his own skin and distance his private equity firm from the radioactive fallout, Uncle Clayton threw his niece directly under the bus. Her family did not just quietly distance themselves, they completely cut her off. Uncle Clayton released a highly polished statement through a top-tier public relations firm, publicly condemning Chloe's actions. He claimed he had absolutely no knowledge of the frivolous lawsuit against me, and stated that his campaign donation to Judge Sterling was a routine political contribution that had been maliciously manipulated by a rogue niece. The statement officially severed all financial and personal ties between Chloe and her extended family. She was completely disowned, exiled from the only social circle that gave her life meaning. The carefully curated social media image Chloe had spent years maintaining evaporated overnight. The lifestyle influencers she called friends stopped returning her calls. The exclusive country club revoked her membership due to unpaid dues and moral turpitude clauses. She was no longer a wealthy heiress married to a successful businessman. She was a broke, disgraced woman facing federal prison time living out of cheap motels while waiting for a public defender to answer her calls. Jamal was collateral damage in his own scam. His polished corporate facade was shattered. The moment the news of the federal bribery sting hit the local Atlanta papers, Jamal's employer called him into human resources and terminated his contract immediately. No respectable company was going to keep a man on their payroll who had actively participated in perjury and extortion. He was unemployed, bankrupt, and married to a federal criminal. The illusion he had traded his own sister to protect was completely obliterated. He had absolutely nothing left to show for his betrayal. A week had passed since the federal government dismantled my brother's life in front of a live courtroom. The silence returning to my Atlanta estate was absolute and profoundly healing. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly intelligence reports for a client when my perimeter security system chimed. I pulled up the primary feed on my desktop monitor. Standing outside my massive wrought iron front gates were Yvonne and Calvin. They looked entirely different from the arrogant, confident people who had sat in the front row of the federal courtroom, nodding along as a corrupt judge tried to strip my dignity. Today they looked exhausted, aged, and utterly desperate. I did not buzz them in. I did not unlock the pedestrian gate. I left my office, walked out the heavy mahogany front door, and took a slow, deliberate walk down the long stone driveway. The Georgia heat was already rising, but the air felt remarkably clear. I stopped 3 feet away from the heavy iron bars separating my sanctuary from the people who had tried to destroy it. Yvonne gripped the metal bars, her knuckles white. The manufactured tears were already flowing freely down her cheeks. "Maya, thank God!" Yvonne sobbed, her voice trembling with that familiar theatrical desperation. "We have been trying to call you for days. You have to help us. You have to help your brother." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting in the pockets of my tailored trousers. "Help him with what?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Calvin stepped forward, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Jamal lost everything, Maya. He lost his job. The bank took the apartment. They are freezing his accounts because of the bankruptcy. And Chloe." My mother spat the name like it was pure poison. "Chloe manipulated all of us. She manipulated Jamal. We had absolutely no idea how bad she really was. We did not know she was lying about the injury. She tricked us into supporting that awful lawsuit." The sheer, unadulterated delusion was staggering. They were attempting to rewrite history right in front of my face. They wanted to pretend they had not stood on my porch and demanded the deed to my home. They wanted to erase the fact that Yvonne had called me on a recorded line begging me to settle the case and threatening me with social ruin at their church. They were trying to throw Chloe completely under the bus to save their precious golden boy. "We need money for a defense attorney," Calvin pleaded, finally getting to the point. "Jamal is facing federal charges because of that corrupt judge Chloe's family brought in. If you do not help him, he is going to federal prison. You have the resources, Maya. You have your business. You are his sister. Please, you have to save him." I looked at the two people who had spent my entire childhood telling me my dark skin and natural hair made me inferior. The people who had drained their retirement to fund an illusion of wealth for my brother while ignoring my military sacrifices. They had actively conspired to steal the home I built with my own hands. "I am not saving anyone," I stated, my voice dropping to a calm, absolute register. "You sat in a courtroom and watched a corrupt judge try to strip me of my military honor, and you nodded along because you thought it would buy Jamal a free house. You knew exactly who Chloe was, and you knew exactly what you were doing." Yvonne gasped, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. "Maya, please, we are your family." I looked my mother directly in the eyes. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just total, unshakable peace. "You chose your family." I told them, my words ringing with absolute finality. "Now live with them. Live." I turned my back to the iron gates. I pulled the small security remote from my pocket and pressed the master lock button. The heavy mechanical gears whirred to life, sending thick steel deadbolts sliding into solid concrete. The gates were permanently sealed. I did not look over my shoulder as Yvonne wailed my name. I simply walked back up the stone pathway, stepped inside my beautiful home, and closed the heavy mahogany door. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the expansive private balcony of my master suite. The morning sun was shining brightly over the lush green canopy of my $4 million estate. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in my left hand. In my right hand, I held my navy cross. The heavy brass gleamed brilliantly in the daylight. I traced the edges of the metal with my thumb. Growing up, I was conditioned to believe my sole purpose was to be a stepping stone for my brother's success. I was taught that my boundaries were disrespectful and that my survival was entirely secondary to the family image. But the military taught me how to evaluate a battlefield. It taught me how to identify toxic threats and eliminate them with absolute precision. I walked back inside my bedroom, where my service dress blue uniform jacket was hanging neatly on a valet stand. I carefully pinned the Navy Cross back onto the left side of the chest, right above my heart, exactly where it belonged. This medal represented pulling my brothers and sisters in arms out of a burning inferno. It represented absolute courage under catastrophic fire. It represented saving lives. I smiled, taking a slow, deep sip of my coffee. I reflected that this medal represents saving lives, and today it saved my own. The most profound lesson from Maya's journey is that biological ties do not excuse toxic behavior, and you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. True strength lies in recognizing your own worth and refusing to be a stepping stone for someone else's entitlement. When confronted with manipulation and gaslighting, the best defense is absolute clarity, impenetrable boundaries, and unshakable facts. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. Walking away from people who continuously disrespect your boundaries isn't an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and self-love. If you have ever had to build an iron gate to protect your peace from toxic family members, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more empowering content.